It's Fight News Now. I'm John Pollock, along with John Ramdeen and Robin Black. I'm not going to lie to everybody out there. Usually we start this off saying there is a lot of news to get to. Well, I am checking my agenda. It is a pretty clean one going into the weekend, guys. This is not a very busy day, but it gives us a chance to just chat about some bigger topics, some bigger issues. One of them, for those that are here in Canada, are looking ahead to UFC 206. Next week, tickets are going to be going on sale. A number of the fighters are going to be coming to Toronto doing media. And I guess, what do you sense is going to be the public interest in this card as we have seen it, John? Because most are resigned to the fact that the big prize of a George St-Pierre return, very unlikely for this card, and what you're getting is a light heavyweight championship fight in the main event.
Yeah, and I think people realize that that's an outstanding main event. There's clearly title implications. You have this force.
Does that sell out the Air Canada Center?
Again, I don't know if this was the main event, if the card is what it is right now. I mean, the 145-pound matchup between Doo Ho Choi and Cub Swanson, Ron and I were talking about it. This is our main event, but of course, the light heavyweight showdown between Rumble and DCS, that's going to get a lot of people's attention. I just don't know if those two fights alone are going to be able to sell out the Air Canada Center. So the conversation is, what else are they going to add? What other big fights?
How about a live stream of John Jones' hearing as the co-feature from Nevada?
I love it.
I don't like it. It makes me uncomfortable. I think there's some chance we may have Daniel Cormier here next week.
And AJ.
And AJ. Some chance, I'm told. I want to do a little breakdown of one of Cormier's fights. If anyone has any ideas what you'd like me to break down with Daniel Cormier, please hit me up on Twitter. Because he's a very smart guy. I just saw him in LA not long ago. He's also a very lovable character. Like you guys have talked to him before. He's a very huggable character. I don't know why people don't quite get super pumped for him. I think it was a weird John Jones dynamic thing, but Dan Cormier is a brilliant fighter, super underappreciated for a guy who's the light heavyweight champion of the world, and in a time where John Jones didn't exist, would be one of the pound-for-pound greats.
I think with a lot of the different champions, I mean, we somewhat take for granted when a Conor or a Ronda does the level of business we see. I mean, those are really once-in-a-lifetime fighters that the UFC has lucked in that two of them have come around at the same time to do this level of business that not everyone is going to be at that level. Some people are not going to be anywhere near that, and that's not to me a knock on a Daniel Cormier. This will do a healthy pay-per-view number. This one is not going to do awful. But we so often compare it to the highest high, and as a fight, I think a lot of people can appreciate this is a fantastic fight, and I don't think a guy has to be scrutinized just because you don't attract as many eyes as another champion, but it's still a quality fight, and it's not every album that goes out there is going to be platinum, to use a dated reference.
Yeah, I understand
What's
what you're saying. I understand what you're saying, but when you look at what it comes down to numbers, and of course, UFC 206 comes right after UFC 205, and I think everybody...
Does this get hurt being sandwiched?
Of course it will, because you're looking at what many people right now are calling the greatest card in the history of cards because of how loaded it is. As a matter of fact, we're looking at some of the fights on that card that nobody is even going to be talking about because, yes, we have Conor and Eddie Alvarez on the card. You have Tyron Woodley and Stephen Thompson for the championship. Joanna and Jacek on the card. You have Donald Cerrone on the card, and nobody's going to give any love to Thiago Alves and Jim Miller. And then you go to the next fight card. You have the light heavyweight championship of the world. Everybody's anticipating, oh yeah, certainly the UFC is going to give us George St-Pierre. He's teasing that he's going to come back. They're going to be disappointed when he's not on that card. So what else do you do to ensure that the fans are going to tune into this pay-per-view? Like we mentioned, the 145-pound matchup is awesome. Some of the other fights that they've announced, Misha Serkinov and Krylov, yeah, that'll go on the pay-per-view. But what other fights are they going to give us to entice the fans to try to raise that number for pay-per-view buys?
Yeah, well, I mean, if those guys are in town next week and they do the rounds, and in the city we live in, you start hearing more Rumble. They're doing things at the Yonge and Dundas Rumble, Yonge and Dundas Square. So it'll get people. It'll be fun to be in a city where people are talking about the UFC again, for it to come here, so you can get excited about it. I think Daniel Cormier is underappreciated as one of the brilliant fighters of his era, and I think Anthony Johnson is misunderstood. People have been, oh my God, he's got unbelievable power. That's not just something that stands alone in a vacuum. That's created through his physicality and the work that he does, but it's also created through brilliant technique, brilliant coaching, and incredible development. So I think it's one of those things, when you go and Anthony Johnson, nobody's got knockout power like this guy. That's true, but that becomes a limiting part of the conversation. He's much more than that.
As we look ahead, I mean, the UFC, they were planning to have 2 weekends free of UFC cards before the next one, which is November 5th for the Tough Latin America finale. Now with the cancellation of the Philippines card that was to go down this weekend, they get 3 weeks of breathing room. Do you think that that inherently helps a card like a 205, that you do have a bit of built-up demand? And as silly as 3 weeks sounds, that's an eternity for in-between UFC events, where you kind of get your appetite whet with the Tough Latin America card, which has a great lightweight main event, and then 205. I mean, you do get some breathing room.
Yeah, and I mean, you get the breathing room, and then you have the anticipation, because that was one of my favorite things about mixed martial arts.
3 weeks, people are going to focus on that 205 card, where usually it's divided for this Saturday's card.
Exactly, and when you have the biggest card ever with the biggest names on it, with title implications in 3 different divisions, some of the biggest stars in the organization, as well as, you know, you look at the middleweight matchup between Chris Weidman and Yoel Romero, you have title implications at 185 pounds. So everything is affected. The UFC is going to hammer home how important this fight card is, how big it is, that everybody, if you are a fight fan, you need to tune into this, and everybody is going to be on board, because they've had enough time to be away from the sport to say, you're right, this is my sport, I can't wait to watch this fight.
Not me, man. The global experiment that is the evolution of combat, that is the UFC. I like it dense, and I like it every weekend and midweek.
Final topic. It was announced earlier this week that Dave Schaller, who's been the senior VP of public relations for the UFC, he's leaving the company after 205 to take a job with the Philadelphia 76ers. He's the latest name. He joins Joe Silva, Lorenzo Fertitta. I mean, by the end of this year, we're going to look at a drastically different UFC organization with some key names that are no longer part of it. I'm going to be really interested to look at this company a year after the sale of all the differences.
This is really just a sign of things to come. You have to believe it. You know, they're not spending $4 billion to not make as much as they possibly can. The goal is to try to build this, and they feel that they're taking those necessary steps to make this even bigger than when it was owned by Zuffa.
Imagine Dave Schaller now has like an off season.
Yeah,
that's going to be weird. That's going to be weird.
That is going to do it for us, but stay tuned. We have more Fight News Now coming your way.